Have you ever felt like, traditional education can be a little, I don't know, stingy?
Yeah.
Like, we're only giving these young minds crumbs when they're capable of devouring a whole feast?
Right.
And that's what we're diving into today, right?
Yeah.
This idea of a generous curriculum,
Mhm.
and we're taking a trip to the world of Charlotte Mason to do it.
Yes.
Specifically, we're going to really unpack her ideas about religious education.
Okay.
And don't worry, we're not digging through her entire body of work. We're working with excerpts from Volume 6. So think of it as our curated highlight reel.
A highlight reel of a fascinating philosophy, really, especially for her time. I mean, we're talking late 19th, early 20th century.
Right.
And Mason, she didn't subscribe to that blank slate theory of education.
No, not at all.
She saw children as capable of so much more.
Exactly.
With this innate curiosity and a capacity for deep thinking.
Yes. And she had this incredible phrase, education is the science of relations. It's like she inherently understood that learning wasn't about cramming facts.
Yeah. No, it's about making connections.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's about the feast.
Okay, so then how do we actually build this generous curriculum? Give us the recipe.
Okay. Well, when it came to crafting a successful syllabus, Mason was adamant about 3 key ingredients.
All right, let's hear it.
First, the content, it needs to be knowledge-rich. And second, we've got to have diversity.
Okay, so we're already breaking free from those dry textbooks and endless lists of facts.
Absolutely. And third, the way it's presented, the language, it has to be engaging.
So paint me a picture here. What does that actually look like in practice?
All right, so let's say a child is learning about ancient Egypt.
Okay, I'm with you.
We're not just, confined to a history textbook.
Right.
We're talking stories about pharaohs, hands-on projects, building pyramids, maybe even trying to decipher hieroglyphics.
Yes, engaging all the senses, making it come alive.
Exactly.
I love it.
And this actually brings us to one of Mason's most, I think, powerful tools, narration. She was a huge advocate for single readings, followed by student narration.
Okay, so let me guess. This means we're saying goodbye to rereading the same paragraph a million times.
Exactly. It's about quality over quantity.
I like it.
Mason believed that single-focused reading, followed by the student retelling what they learned, it strengthens their attention. It doesn't dilute the information.
It's like that saying, tell me and I forget, teach me and I may remember, involve me and I learn.
Precisely. And this idea of narration, it's not just some old-fashioned theory,
Okay.
It actually has direct parallels to modern learning techniques, things like active recall, spaced repetition.
Interesting.
These are things that we know help make information stick.
It's like Charlotte Mason was like a time traveler ahead of her time. Okay, speaking of things that stick with you, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about Mason's emphasis on religious education.
Okay.
Because she considered it a cornerstone of a truly generous curriculum.
Right. Absolutely.
Right.
And while her approach, you can apply it across subjects.
Right.
What we're going to do is we're going to focus specifically on her thoughts on teaching the Old and New Testaments.
Okay.
She had some very strong opinions in this area that might surprise you.
Already intrigued. So let's start with the Old Testament.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, it can feel a little daunting even for adults sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
How did Mason even approach that with children?
Well, it's interesting. Mason observed that parents, especially mothers, they often have an instinctive knack for discussing faith with their young children.
It's true. That's just something about the way parents explain things.
Yeah.
It just clicks.
And I think Mason picked up on that. She believed it's because parents, we tend to meet children where they are developmentally. We don't underestimate their ability to grasp big ideas.
So it's not about like dumbing down the message.
Right.
But finding that right language, those right stories to make it relatable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, for Mason, the Old Testament wasn't just about these captivating tales. It was about laying that groundwork for understanding humanity's relationship with God.
She had this fascinating example, didn't she? It was about Goethe and his experience with the Old Testament.
Yes. Goethe, the famous writer and thinker, he actually found a lot of peace and clarity in the Old Testament, especially in those first 5 books of Moses.
Interesting.
He actually described it as a source of peace amidst the chaos of his life.
Wow.
And get this, I want to read you a quote. He said, "If an ever active imagination led me here and there, If the medley of fable, history, mythology threatened to drive me to distraction, I betook myself again to those morning lands. I buried myself in the 5 books of Moses, and there amongst the widespreading shepherd people, I found the greatest solitude and the greatest comfort.
Wow, that is powerful, finding that sense of grounding in these ancient texts, you know.
Exactly. And Mason believed that children, especially with their natural curiosity and openness to new ideas, you know, they're uniquely positioned to have similar experiences.
So then, how did she recommend actually introducing these sometimes complex texts to children?
Yeah.
Did she have, like, a specific method?
She was a big believer in a gradual approach.
Okay.
Starting with, simpler narratives for younger children, and then as they mature and grow, you progress to the more complex texts and even commentaries.
Meeting them where they are.
Exactly. For example, if you've got a child who's just starting out, maybe around 6 years old, she recommended those straightforward retellings of Bible stories.
Okay.
And then between the ages of, let's say, 6 and 12, she suggested introducing books like Canon Patterson Smith's The Bible for the Young,
Okay.
which provides, a more in-depth but still accessible exploration of the Old Testament.
And even at that young age, she still really emphasized encountering the actual language of the Bible, right?
Oh, absolutely. No watered-down versions for Charlotte Mason.
I love that.
She wanted them to experience that beauty and that power of the original text firsthand.
Mhm.
What about those passages that are kind of tricky?
Yeah.
Even for adults, they leave us kind of scratching our heads.
Right.
Did she say to avoid those?
No, she saw those as opportunities,
Okay.
opportunities for exploration and for discussion. As children got older, she even recommended introducing them to different commentaries, like Costley White's Old Testament history,
Okay.
so that they could see how different scholars have interpreted those passages over time.
So it's about kind of like encouraging critical thinking, showing that even these ancient texts, they can have these multiple layers of meaning.
Exactly.
I like it.
It's about giving them those tools to grapple with complexity and draw their own conclusions, wouldn't you say?
Definitely. And that really seems to be a hallmark of this generous curriculum idea. It's about giving young minds the tools and the freedom to engage deeply, ask their own questions.
Absolutely.
Not just feeding them information.
It's about nurturing that inherent curiosity that they have rather than simply dictating answers. Which makes me wonder, how did this approach then translate to the New Testament?
Okay.
Because if the Old Testament is about laying the groundwork, what's the New Testament about?
Well, I think for Mason, the New Testament was about encountering Jesus,
Okay.
understanding his life, his teachings, and ultimately his message.
And when we look at the New Testament, she seemed especially drawn to the Gospels.
You're right. She felt like the Gospels offered the most direct, the most powerful window into Jesus's life and his message.
Okay.
But she also acknowledged that some passages can be challenging.
Right.
So she recommended commentaries, especially for older students, to help them delve a little bit deeper. Like, for example, she recommended commentaries by Bishop Walsham Howe.
But even with the commentaries, she never strayed from her belief in that power of narration, right?
Yeah.
It's like her signature move.
It is. It really is. And in fact, she even went as far as to say that narration brings a poetic insight to the Gospels.
Poetic insight. Okay, I love that. What did she mean by that?
Well, I think she believed that the act of retelling these stories, finding your own words to express the emotions, the significance,
Yeah.
that it allowed students to connect with the text on this much deeper, much more personal level.
Oh, engaging both the head and the heart.
Precisely. However, and this is interesting, while she was passionate about sharing the Gospels, Mason was wary of what she called hortatory teaching.
Hortatory teaching. I mean, for those of us who don't speak fluent 19th century educator, what does that even mean?
Basically, it means preaching or moralizing, explicitly telling students what they should be thinking or what they should be feeling.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And Mason, she worried that this could actually have the opposite of the intended effect.
Okay.
That it could lead to resistance, maybe even apathy.
Like we're trying to force feed them knowledge and it's just not going down smoothly.
Exactly. It's about creating an environment where students can encounter the text, wrestle with its complexities, and ultimately come to their own understanding.
Trusting them to find their own way.
Yeah.
I like that.
And that actually brings us to what I think is maybe the most surprising aspect of Mason's approach to religious education. Her support for using poetry to help deepen an understanding of Jesus's life and his teachings.
Poetry. Okay, now you've got my attention. Tell me more.
Yeah, it is a bit unexpected, isn't it? We don't usually see poetry and religious education paired together like that.
Right.
But Mason, she truly believed that poetry had this unique ability, to express those deeper aspects of Jesus's life, of his message, in a way that sometimes prose just can't quite capture.
So it's not just about, like, reading poems about Jesus, but using poetry as this tool to kind of unlock something deeper within the Gospels themselves.
You got it. It's about that resonance, you see. Poetry taps into the emotional core of these stories.
Okay.
It makes them feel more immediate, more real.
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean. I can see how poetry could bring, like, a new dimension to those stories that maybe we wouldn't get otherwise.
And here's the thing. She wasn't just, theorizing about this. Mason actually put this into practice in her own teaching.
Right.
She saw firsthand how it could help those students really connect with the material.
You mentioned earlier an anecdote about one of her students.
Yeah.
A 13-year-old. I think you said she wrote a poem without even being asked to. Tell me everything.
So picture this. You've got this 13-year-old student,
Okay.
and she's given an assignment. And the prompt is based on that phrase, "The people sat in darkness. I am the light of the world."
Powerful phrase.
Right. Now, here's the thing. She wasn't told, hey, write a poem about this.
Okay.
But that's exactly what she did, almost instinctively. It's like she understood that poetry was the most natural way, the most authentic way to really respond to those words.
Wow, that's amazing. Talk about a light bulb moment. It's like she tapped into something so fundamental about how we connect with these big truths, these spiritual truths.
It really is. It just shows the power, right, of trusting children, trusting their ability to engage with complex ideas and, find their own unique path towards understanding.
Which I guess leads to a question, right? How realistic was that level of trust? It seemed like Mason had a lot of faith in her students. Faith in their ability to understand these complex texts and these big questions about God and faith. Was she being, well, a little overly idealistic?
Yeah, it's a fair question, right? Not every child is going to respond the same way.
Right.
We all know there are differences in learning styles and interests, even just in their own spiritual readiness.
Of course. But I wonder if what Mason was really getting at was this idea that we often underestimate children, that maybe by shielding them from complexity or by trying to spoon feed them these overly simplified answers, we're actually doing them a disservice.
I think you're onto something. And honestly, if anything, her ideas are even more relevant today, wouldn't you say?
Right.
Think about it. We live in this world that's just saturated with information.
It's overwhelming.
So much of it is superficial.
Right.
And I think what children really need, maybe now more than ever, isn't easy answers.
Yeah.
But the tools and that encouragement to ask those hard questions, those big questions, to seek out deeper meaning.
Yes.
And really make those connections for themselves.
It all comes back to that phrase, education is the science of relations. It's not just about connecting with information. It's about connecting with ourselves and with each other.
Yeah.
And with something bigger than ourselves.
Exactly. And I think, when we can cultivate that sense of wonder and connection, when we can do that through a truly generous curriculum, well, we're giving them a gift, really, a lifelong love of learning.
I love that.
Yeah.
But I want to shift gears for a second. We've been talking a lot about religious education.
Yeah.
But how did Mason's ideas about a generous curriculum apply to other areas of learning?
Well, that's what's so great about her philosophy, It's not confined to just one subject.
Okay.
Remember those 3 key elements we talked about? Knowledge-rich, diverse, engaging.
Right, yeah.
Those apply to any subject.
Okay, so walk me through it. Let's take history as an example. How do we make history generous? Because it can be so easy to get bogged down in just names and dates,
Right, but history is full of stories.
Yeah, it is.
It's got intrigue, betrayal, courage, innovation. It's all in there. So instead of just memorizing dates, imagine if children could experience the past more directly, like through historical fiction or through primary source documents, maybe even trying their hand at writing from a different perspective.
Oh, I love that. Like, what if they had to write a letter home, pretend they were a soldier during a certain war, or a diary entry from the perspective of, like, a queen? That just brings history alive.
Exactly. And it doesn't stop there. Imagine science. We could just read about the life cycle of a butterfly, or we could have them raise butterflies from caterpillars.
Yes.
Let them observe each stage firsthand, maybe even, sketch their observations in a nature journal.
Okay, I'm so with you. Because that's the kind of learning that really stays with you. It goes beyond just absorbing information. It's about making it your own.
And I think that's the beauty of this whole idea of a generous curriculum. It gets us out of that textbook, that lecture mindset.
Yes.
It's about sparking curiosity, inviting that exploration, and maybe even a little bit of beautiful chaos.
A beautiful chaos. I love that. But it makes me think, doesn't this approach require a certain level of trust? Trust in the student, trust that they'll be able to handle it, even if the material is challenging or if, the path isn't totally clear?
You've hit the nail on the head. And you know what? That's where the real magic happens.
Yeah.
Because when we trust students to be capable, to be curious, they can really surprise us.
It's almost like we're changing the whole power dynamic, aren't we?
Yeah.
The teacher isn't this all-knowing sage on the stage anymore.
Right.
They become more of a guide, like a co-explorer, right there alongside the student.
Exactly. And that takes a certain level of, I think, humility, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
Because we have to acknowledge that we don't have all the answers.
Right.
But what we can do is create that space for discovery, that space for wonder.
It reminds me of something you said earlier about how even Charlotte Mason, she had her beliefs, but she was so careful not to tell students exactly what they should think or feel.
Right.
That whole thing about avoiding hortatory teaching, it really stuck with me.
Yeah.
Because it's about respecting a child's autonomy,
Yeah.
giving them that space to wrestle with those ideas, come to their own conclusions.
Exactly.
Which I think can be, let's be honest, a little scary for some people, right?
Yeah.
Especially when we're talking about these bigger topics like faith or morality.
Right.
We want to make sure they're getting it, that they're getting that right message.
We want to control the narrative.
Yes, exactly. But I think, if we think about it, when we're genuinely interested in something, don't we want to learn more? We naturally ask those questions.
Mm-hmm.
We explore those different perspectives.
Yeah.
And then we come to our own understanding.
Yeah. You can lead a horse to water.
You can't make them drink.
Exactly.
You can't force someone to believe something, right?
It has to come from within.
Yes. It has to come from within. And that's where this idea of a generous curriculum is so powerful.
I think so too.
It's not about just giving them the answers.
Right.
But giving them this whole feast of ideas and experiences and even challenges.
Yes, that spark that inner fire.
Yes. And then that drive to understand.
Yeah.
To figure things out. To make your own meaning.
I love that image, that feast.
Yes.
And you know what? Just like any good feast, there's room for everyone.
Absolutely. And what I really appreciate about Mason's philosophy is that real emphasis on diversity. And I don't just mean like diversity of content.
Yeah.
But that understanding that every single child is unique.
Yes.
They have their own strengths, their own interests, their own way of learning.
Every single one.
It's about honoring those differences and creating a space where they can really thrive.
Absolutely. And when we do that, I think we unlock this whole new world of possibility. Because we're moving away from this idea that there's just one way to learn.
We're not just like educating minds, right?
Yeah.
We're cultivating human beings.
Exactly.
Helping them find their own voices, their passions, their place in the world.
And that, to me, that's a beautiful thing, isn't it?
It is.
To see that spark, that moment when a child's eyes light up because they've connected with an idea or a concept or a way of thinking.
Absolutely. It's those aha moments. Those are the moments that really matter. And I think those moments are so much more likely to happen when we create that learning environment, that's rich and engaging and, even a little chaotic sometimes.
Yes, I totally agree. Because you know what? Learning, it doesn't always happen in a straight line, does it?
No, not at all.
It's messy, it's got twists and turns, and we have to embrace that uncertainty. We've got to embrace that joy of discovery.
It's about fostering that love of learning.
Yeah.
And that sense of wonder. And those things, they stay with us long after we've left the classroom.
So true. Education isn't just about, reaching a destination. It's about the journey. It's about exploring and connecting and growing.
Well said. And to everyone listening, I hope this little deep dive that we did today into Charlotte Mason's world has sparked your own sense of curiosity, that you're inspired to go out and create your own generous curriculum.
Yes.
Whether it's in your homes or your classrooms or even just in your own minds and hearts.
Because a generous curriculum, at its core, it's about so much more than just the what we teach, isn't it?
Yes.
It's about the how. It's about how we approach the world around us, how we engage with ideas, and how we nurture that love of learning in ourselves and in the generations to come.
Absolutely. Well said.